Today, big techs make a lot of decisions about us without us. There's hardly any transparency in the process of formulation of policies that affect us directly. And the same goes for their implementation. The most dominant tech players in the industry decide on what we should be paying attention to, what rules we should play by, what we can and cannot share on their platforms, and above all, who gets to and who doesn't get to speak. And how it mostly is done is probably a group of designers sitting in a conference room or their ideas room in those formidable buildings situated in first world countries with little or no involvement of the civil societies of the countries that those rules would actually be implemented in, make these big decisions. It is not news anymore that dominant social media platforms often give in to the whims of the ruling power and often cut out access for people who don't chime in with the majoritarian views or thoughts. The impact of the policies and workflow in such scenarios that the designers propose sometimes extends to the point that somebody ends up losing their life, and that communicates the gravity. The content and notifications that are being constantly pushed to us through our mobile devices, the nudges, the triggers, they do so much more than just make our phones light up, right? They demand and get our attention. The suggestions we get to see on the side while watching a video or buying a product are ideas that are being fed to us. They make us think about something even when we don't intend to. And it doesn't stop there. We, the users, who are also creators on those big tech platforms, are being made the accomplice. To make our content get the maximum reach, the right number of followers, likes, or whatever, we have to play along with whatever the curative algorithm deems as successful. This has led to a degree of homogenization in the content that isn't doing anyone any good. We are creating what sells, not what we want to sell. The internet that most of us envisioned as a tool for our liberation, it has ended up caging us. The internet that was first envisioned as belonging to no one and everyone, today, it definitely belongs to someone. Now, in the past, open source has helped bring in a fair share of sanity into the tech world. When a technology is built in the open, there's a large number of eyes that are ready to scrutinize, and hence the decision making is sort of democratized. Today, open source softwares form a major chunk of the tech stacks that are used by the big tech. Open source has its own set of challenges, but it does ensure that a good amount of control is in the hand of a wider set of contributors, and not everything is being left to the giants. The secret sauce at play here is diversity. Diversity of mental models, perspectives that community participation brings into open source projects. About 2 decades ago, open source was thought of as just another fad that would pass, just as the internet. But today, big companies such as Google, Microsoft, Apple, Meta, to name a few, they have all joined the movement after realizing that there's no better way to get continuous innovation in their products and tap into the global talent pool. I understand there are still some drawbacks in the system as it cannot be measured in binary, but the sum total of the benefits here, they definitely outweigh the drawbacks in this case. Now, being able to look at a problem through a lens, through a myriad of frames, it's a superpower. It allows us to look at a complex problem in different ways and thus improve the odds of arriving at a better conclusion. Just like the users, the creator base is also heterogeneous, and that's a win. But a big problem with the open source projects today that I have realized working on open source projects is the lack of design participation. I see a lot of contributions coming in from developers, but it's a rare sight to see a contribution coming in from a designer. And why does that happen? Now, to emphasize on what makes a problem design problem, I would like to quote Mishra, founder of Lotus Development Corporation, from the design manifesto he wrote in 1996, where he says, I might be a little off here, but what he says is, what is design? It is where you stand with foot in two worlds, the world of tech and the world of people and human purpose, and try to bring the two together. Now, this loosely translates into as long as a feature or change is user facing, it is a design problem and not just technical problem. But that said, if the designers are only invited when it comes to fixing a broken experience, the final product would end up being full of incoherent patches, and that's not what we want. It's a designer's actual job to look at problems in the context of the big picture. Designers are mostly responsible for including the user and people perspective into a solution, and that's not something that one could just give away, right? But here we are. Hence, we need designers to be involved in the development process of open source products since the beginning. So, tech as an industry, it's brimming with highly driven and smart people. But sometimes they miss the point that what we are building is going to be used by people who fall beyond the boundary of tech. And in circumstances that a small group of people sitting in a conference room could never imagine or predict. This is not a do-it-yourself race. Usability of a solution is not an add-on, and it directly translates into value. This is something that we all agree on, especially now. And in open source, when a large group of people come together, they debate, discuss the best approach to execute a technical strategy. But who will talk about the human side of the picture? Who will make a mention of the 100 ways a technology could be manipulated or used against people? And the small considerations that could help mitigate those malicious usage. Talking about a very recent incident, when Apple came up with AirTags, they would have hardly imagined that it would get most popular among the wrong kind of users, right? The stalkers. Now, Apple decided to restrict the compatibility of the device to Apple products only, and that was the primary cause for its exploitation. So what would happen is stalkers would attach an AirTag to the vehicles or any object of their victims, and if the victim isn't using an Apple product, they will never get to know that their movement is being tracked. Now, I want you to imagine that if there was an open forum or space for designers from around the world to participate in creation of such devices or features, use cases might have been surfaced. They might have surfaced long before they did on Twitter, and someone might have proposed a decent workflow to solve the issue for all we know, right? Now, these are very exciting times. Web3 is here. I'm not excited because of the promise of utopia that some Web3 creators insist on, but the fact that we get to build the internet again. And the reason that makes me very hopeful is that at the core of Web3 lies open source protocol. Now, the whole concept of the emergence of Web3 is around decentralization, of power, of decisions, of control. And there are a series of lessons that Web 2 taught us that back this requirement. I feel it is really important to have these conversations now since we are on the onset of something new. Most Web 3 products are built around blockchain. In blockchain, an open source protocol, a piece of code that we call smart contracts, they define the relationship between various participants in the system. I'm not getting to the depth of this, but I'm mostly talking about parts that we are concerned about. So these smart contracts are very powerful pieces of code. They decide the rules of interactions and transactions, and they're automatically enforced. Now, when a user signs these smart contracts with their private keys, they're incentivized. Now, this incentivization happens in the form of a token. These tokens can be anything. They can be currencies, goods, they could be badges, they could even be access to a gated content or rights. And that's where the critical part of blockchain lies. This very nature of tokens and the governance rules around them, that makes it fall in the design premises. Because now we are talking not just technology, but economics, anthropology, openness, governance, policy making. Now, if you are interested in cryptocurrencies, you might be aware of the smart contracts in place for cryptocurrencies transaction, right? But are you aware that a similar piece of code can also approve or deny your access to a content, event, or even something vital? Idea sounds bizarre, right? Not so much. Using NFTs to provide access to token-gated content in the real world is a thing, which technically is nothing different than furthering the existing concept of paywalls. And I'm sure not everyone here has a great experience with paywalls. And expanding the same to real world scenarios, not just web, just makes us wonder. Now, when we started to look at and talk about design as a profession, we reduced it to a tool for maximizing profits and attention, well, in most cases, and no longer see it as a participatory act that it fundamentally is. One in which we co-create, co-design. The current context, the design tasks get broken into small isolated premises to be looked at one at a time. And the eventual picture, it hardly makes a complete sense. Now, this image from Micro Macro, it's one of my favorite cooperative detective games, as I couldn't find a better visual representation for system thinking. The most beautiful part about the gameplay of this game is that it depicts the narrative behind an isolated incident. The character in this game is spotted at different locations doing different activities, and only when you trace the trail of events, the actions, they begin to make sense. And that's what I'm talking about. The role of a designer shouldn't be reduced to making a feature usable, like one part at a time, but rather question the purpose and traceability of decisions, back them with data, facilitate discussions, preferably in the open. And that's the reason designers need to make deliberate effort to be more active in the open source communities, spaces. Do there what they do the best and ensure we are heading in the right direction. Biased smart contracts are the potential dark UX patterns of Web3. Web 2 taught us a lot of lessons around the kind of impact that it could have. And now is the time when we should actually look at reversing the narrative, because we have a chance to. The absence of design participation, if not attended on time, can make up for the same problems we are facing with Web 2. And it could even be worse. So let this be the upgrade that we are all waiting for.